Hi, Trinity Baptist Church. Welcome back to a new week. Well, welcome to a new week, and welcome back to our daily videos. I'd like to go back today to Brenda Salter McNeil's book, Roadmap to Reconciliation 2.0. I have found it really fruitful for me, and I think it's a good book that can point us to Bible passages that we can be reflecting on here in 2020. The next chapter that I was reading recently is called Shake It Up. It's about catalytic events. Basically, if you recall this diagram, we kind of operate in a cycle of protection and isolation. We want to be safe, and so we kind of isolate ourselves from the things that make us uncomfortable. Dr. Salter McNeil says it is when we encounter a catalytic event that we get launched into a different loop of reconciliation. And she says the perfect example is Saul of Tarsus in Acts chapter 9. I'll just read the story. Acts 9, 1 through 9. Saul has been watching over the martyrdom of Stephen, the murder of other Christians, and he has no plans to stop. Acts 9, 1 and following says, "But Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues at Damascus, so that if he found any belonging to the way, men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. Now as he went on his way, he approached Damascus, and suddenly a light from heaven shone around him, and falling to the ground, he heard a voice saying to him, 'Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?' And he said, 'Who are you, Lord?' And he said, 'I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But rise and enter the city, and you will be told what you are to do.' The men who were traveling with him stood speechless, hearing the voice, but seeing no one. Saul rose from the ground, and although his eyes were opened, he saw nothing. So they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. And for 3 days he was without sight, and neither ate nor drank." Saul thinks he knows where he's going and what he's doing, but along the way he has this catalytic event. Jesus comes and shakes him up and gets him to a place where he's ready to listen. Once he gets to Damascus, eventually this Christian named Ananias comes and tells him about Jesus. And the reality is, had Saul not had this catalytic event on the road, he wouldn't have listened. He would have put Ananias in shackles and brought him back to Jerusalem, potentially to be killed for being a Christian. The catalytic event is what launches him from this cycle where he thinks he knows what he's doing, and he's protecting himself from these Christian ideas to the new ideas, the new insight that God has for him to start living in a new way. And of course, we're so thankful that God intervened in his life this way, even though he has to go through blindness and 3 days of not eating and drinking. I mean, the fruit of Paul, God's work in Paul, is huge chunks of the New Testament. So much of it is comprised of letters that he wrote to other churches, and from churches to churches that he helped plant. And Salter McNeil is talking specifically about these catalytic events in regard to reconciliation, and reconciliation especially in regards to race. I thought this will probably be a little bit longer video. We're at a normal video length already, but I thought I would tell a couple stories of catalytic events in my own life in regards to race and racism. One was when we were eating at a Chinese restaurant. We were with my Japanese grandma, whom I loved. She was the dearest, sweetest woman. You would absolutely love her if you met her. It was interesting, though. My grandma's Japanese, and she made a disparaging comment about, I think, the service, simply because it was Chinese, how different it would be if it were a Japanese restaurant. This was really shocking to me. I'm ethnically Japanese, half, but I didn't realize, I figured that because my grandma was not white or black, that she couldn't be racist. We watched Remember the Titans in every class in high school once we'd taken the class and the teachers were just grading at their desk and there was nothing else to do. And I figured that's what racism looks like. It looks like Remember the Titans. It never occurred to me that this would also be in my family. Another catalytic event was when I was at seminary, and I was paired with a Chinese student. And at the time, I had I had learned more about what the Japanese did to the Chinese in the 20th century, in northern China and in Korea, and how they were horrible to their prisoners of war and were just trying to create an empire. And so in class, we were paired up and supposed to have a discussion, and I didn't really know this person, but something prompted me to say something along the lines of, I'm glad we can do this assignment together. I'm glad we're Christians together, but I'm sorry for what my ancestors did to your ancestors. And it meant a huge deal to this man. I wouldn't totally have expected it. I have kind of an American mindset, but especially in an East Asian mindset, to address that. Even though it wasn't about me and him, it was about my great-grandparents and his great-grandparents, was hugely meaningful to this man. It became part of a lot of conversations, and that was a catalytic event for me, because it has really changed the way I think about my Japanese identity in relation to people's Korean or Chinese identity. It's not just, oh, isn't this great? All our families eat rice and use chopsticks and these different things. It's also, okay, there's a complicated history here that includes a lot of pain and oppression, and sometimes it needs to be addressed. You know that I'm reading this book, and I'm sharing insights from this book with you because of where we are in 2020. And a lot of it is about people on the one side tweeting that Black Lives Matter, and people on another side tweeting that Blue Lives Matter, and among everything else, being entrenched in this division. Regarding that conversation, a real catalytic event for me was when Philando Castile was killed in 2016. This was a year into kind of public Black Lives Matter demonstrations, and I felt pretty torn about the whole thing. I thought there was a lot to be said on both sides. But I remember when Philando Castile was killed in Minnesota, and the video came out of him that his girlfriend had live streamed, and the dash cam came out and all this, and I watched it and saw how he died, and I thought, this is different than I thought. Which doesn't mean all the other cases are different than I thought, but this sure is. And it really brought me up short. That made me pause. It was a catalytic event that, at the very least, made me go, you know what? I don't think that taking sides with broad brushstrokes is the best way to process all these events in our country. To go, okay, I read a headline, therefore it's this kind of story, therefore it's this kind of event, and I'm going to have this kind of opinion because I'm this kind of person. It's just insufficient for all these complicated things. And that was a catalytic event for me. It made me think differently about some of these things and be more interested in the particulars, more ready to listen to various people whenever it comes around. I probably have more catalytic events ahead of me because I know I have more sanctification ahead of me and hopefully more reconciliation ahead of me. But as we head into another week of readings guided by this book, I thought that would be a good place to start. Both remembering Saul in Acts 9 and how he thought he was headed one way, but God intervened and said, no, you need to be ready to listen and head another direction, and to just share some of my personal stories about how God has intervened and given me these catalytic events.